Hello there and welcome to another BoBeats video, and it's finally time to check out the Digitakt 2 from Electron. If you don't know, I'm a huge Digitakt fan. I was one of the first people to ever feature it on YouTube and make tutorials about it. I've made quite a few, you might have seen some of them. And yeah, I just really liked the Digitakt, so I went out and bought one because I wanted to make a video for you all. In today's video, what I want to explore is, does it live up to the hype and is it worth upgrading from Digitakt 1? And we're gonna explore all of that together with a very hands-on review, tutorial, demonstration, whatever you want to call it. And also a big thank you to DistroKid who made this video possible. If you want to upload your music to, say, Apple Music, Tidal, Spotify and other stores, check out DistroKid. They are linked below. More about them later. I want to start by taking you through my workflow, how I create music on the Digitakt. So we're starting out in the sampling menu. Here you can sample from the left-right, the main left-right. You can sample from the USB left-right. You can also sample from individual tracks, so resampling internally, all of the 16 tracks. And here's also the input left and right, which we're gonna sample from. We can select the number of steps that we want to sample, or just 66 seconds total. You can set the recording start here and then you arm it and then you're ready to sample. We press yes to stop. We can press yes to save function and no to delete. Function and yes lets us play back the sample. We can also zoom in here to the waveform. We can trim it before we save it, and we can also turn on looping so that we can check whether or not a loop loops nicely before we save it. We can assign a sample to a track, and there we have it. So now I've recorded a few more pad chords from a mystery synth that I cannot talk about just yet, and maybe you can leave a little comment down here which synth it is that I've sampled. The max sampling length is one of the things that they have improved over the first Digitakt. So instead of having 33 seconds, which I think was the max length on the Digitakt 1, we now have 66 seconds. And also you sample in stereo. Before you could have a stereo source connected, but it would always sample to mono. Next up, we're gonna load the samples from the plus drive. So we hit function, sampling, plus drive, go here to recorded. Here we have pad number 2, 3, and 4. Because I haven't assigned them to any track, press the right arrow key here to select load to project. So I'm going to put down a step here on the first track. I'm going to go to trig. I'm going to make it 16 steps. I'm going to copy that step, hold down step, press copy. I'm going to go into the second step, paste it, then go into source, turn this knob here, select pad number 2, yes, and that one is it, change sample number 3, is again sample number 4. And there are actually some nice drum loops here as factory presets. I'll just load a few. So now if I load a drum loop, and when I'm loading stuff here, if you're unfamiliar to the Electron workflow, basically you have a list here. So under source, you can see up here it says sample. That is the list of samples that are loaded into the working memory, the RAM of the unit, and the RAM has been upgraded. I think that there is now 400 megabytes of RAM versus 64 megabytes on the Digitakt 1, so that's a huge improvement, but I will say that I actually never really pushed the limits of the Digitakt 1 in terms of loading samples. I didn't really find that 64 megabyte sample limit a big problem, and now we also have more slots here for loading samples. So before there was a limit here at I think 127, but now I think there are actually different banks up here. So I believe that there are 8 banks, if I'm not mistaken, of 127 samples. So if I load a loop and I put down a trig here and I change the length here, you will notice something. It won't play in time. And here's where the new machine called stretch comes in. So stretch lets us time stretch a loop. So if I press yes here, it should be in time. And the inclusion of time stretching is not just important for having loops play in sync, it's also important if you, for example, want to change the tuning. So let's do a temporary save of the project. If you hold down track, we can change the tuning of all tracks at once. So this is called Control All. We'll probably get back to that as well. So now I've tuned down everything, and because we have the time stretching algorithm, the loop is still in sync. Previously, if you did this, the loop would just be pitched down and therefore slower, or if you pitched it up, it would just go faster. It means that we can transform something like this into something completely different. So function and no lets us reload that temporary save that we made. Next up, I want to add a hi-hat, and this is a good opportunity to talk about the different trig modes. So the normal trig mode just triggers the track sound, but if I go down here to velocity, I can trigger the sound of a track at different velocities. And the next mode is called retrig. That lets me retrig a sound, basically creating a ratchet, and this can be recorded into the sequencer. We're going to take a look at another feature that is new, and that is that we now have 3 LFOs. So on the Digitakt, I think we started out with 1 LFO, then we got a second one in an update, and now we got a third one. So for the hi-hat, we're going to select a destination. So that will be our amp volume. We're going to turn that up a bit. Going to go to the second LFO. We're going to set it to panning. So what we can do is we can use the third envelope here to, for example, change the speed of the second or first one. And the beat definitely lacks some more synths, so we're gonna record that. So here we have our little loop, and I've actually set it to a stretch machine. And when you set a melodic loop like this to a stretch machine, it's very important that you set the length parameter correctly. All together. Now I want to add some delay to the melodic line, so we just go here to Effects. Now in order to edit this, we press Function, Effects, And here's a difference. So before the effects were, well, they were in different menus, and now instead we just use up and down here to go between delay, reverb, and chorus. We can also go into the filter menu here, press it twice to get to the second page. Now we can cut some bass, so we don't have anything we don't want from that. We can do the same for the pad, basically making room for a bass later. And now I want to go in here to the loop, filter page, first page, and we're gonna change it here. So this is one of the new filters. I don't think this is in Digitakt 1. So this is basically a multi-mode filter that can go from this low pass here, if we add some resonance, to a band pass filter, to a high pass. So we're gonna set it to high pass. I'm gonna turn it down. I'm gonna find the kick. There you are. Turn it down a bit. Just emphasizing it a bit with that high pass filter and some resonance. Here's another old but also changed feature. So under mixer here, we have the compressor, and the compressor can do side chaining. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up the source here to be track number 2, and then we want that to affect the rest. But normally on the old Digitakt 1, everything got compressed. So now instead we can go here, function, setup, and we can go to compressor routing, and we can actually remove track number 2, which is the drum track, from being affected by the compressor. By setting this sidechain filter very low, you can see that we're triggering the sidechaining only when the kick hits. We can go in here to the master, press down, and there's another new feature, the overdrive. So as you can hear, with the time stretching machines, we can keep everything in time, even if there's loops. And I think that this is one of the biggest changes to the Digitakt 2, and one that I actually quite enjoy, because before I couldn't have done something like this. And speaking about Control All, there is now function and setup here. And now we can go to Control All config, and that can basically remove tracks from being controlled by the Control All feature. So we're going to go to my Core 2600M percussive sounds pack. Going to put down this sample here, and we can now lock, instead of changing the level for the entire track, just holding down a step, turning down a knob, and this is what we call the Electron workflow, basically the ability to lock anything to a step, any change to a parameter to a step. So I'm going to put down a snare, and we're going to just lock the snare sample here. And I locked different tuning for it as well. Put it down here a few steps. And I also want to add a bass line. So what we're going to do is we are going to sample that. Now here's another new thing. We have this dedicated button here for the keyboard, letting us play samples chromatically, but you cannot play samples polyphonically unless you're using multiple tracks. And even doing so, I think it's a little bit of a stretch to call that like polyphonic. I mean, sure, you can create polyphonic sequences that way, but it's not truly polyphonic. It's not like on, say, the Sonicware Live and Lo-Fi or the Lo-Fi XT, where you can actually play chords on just one track with one sample. And I think at the core, the lack of polyphonic sample playback on one track has not to do so much with the hardware limitations, but rather the design of this instrument. Because imagine that you could play back a sample polyphonically on one track. They would have to kind of redesign the actual tracks. They would have to redesign the way the modulation works, because what would happen if you set it to, for example, jump between different samples using an LFO? I think there's just a lot of like redesign of some core elements that would have to happen in order for polyphonic sample playback to actually work. I'm not saying it can't be done, I'm not saying that they shouldn't, I think they should try, but I think it's definitely more difficult than we might think. Now we can quantize. So quantization can be done per pattern or per track. So we're just going to do for this track alone, I'm going to put it 80%. Now why not vary this beat a bit? So we can go to pattern here, function copy, and then a new pattern, paste. Okay, this sounds nice. But I'm not too sure about this one. So what we're gonna do for this pattern is we are gonna just change it from a stretch to a one shot. I'm gonna change the length here. So let me set up some modulation here. We have some LFO to tuning, and then I'm gonna set up a modulation here that changes the speed of the first LFO. Maybe do a random. And for the third LFO, let's just go for panning because it's a safe bet. And I think that the brilliance with the Electron workflow, if I compare it to, for example, say the Sonicware groove boxes or the SP404, is that you can do so much with so little. And what we're gonna do now is we are gonna go track number one, gonna change it to a stretch machine, gonna load this loop here, and another step over here and lock another loop. So now I've locked multiple samples, but they're also using the time stretch machine, so I can pitch, I can also change the tempo. And why not go 4 on the floor? And the loops that I have on track number one, we're running them through one of the new filters. So there are multiple different filters, multi-mode filter that I showed you before. This one here, but let's go from low pass to a band pass to a high pass. And then we have this low pass 4 filter. And then we have the equalizer. Set a Q value like so, and there is also a comb filter. So let's set up a modulation. I'm just going to go filter frequency, random LFO, I think. Go to the second filter, shave off some of the bass. Now we definitely need a bass, so this time we're just going to load a sample. So we're going to go to the plus drive here, I think we're gonna check the factory samples. We got the single cycle waveform, gonna turn on loop, starting here with a D sharp, I think it is. I think that's the English word. I'm gonna go up one octave here as well. I'm gonna hold page, copy to copy the page, gonna paste it, gonna remove some of these notes here and maybe just switch around a bit like so. And of course, we're going to add some side chaining. So we're doing that from track number 3 and going into setup. Going to go compressor routing and remove track number 3 from that. Going to change the filter for that bass, add some filter envelope and I know I was talking about sample locking, so I'm gonna load a few hi-hats and then I'm gonna lock them to just one track. Now with 16 tracks, sample locking becomes less of a thing that you need to do. It's more maybe a creative choice than something you need to do out of necessity to save tracks. Changing the amp is always fun. Introduce a lot of craziness. Now I do have a bit more to share about the synth here, but first a quick word from today's sponsor, DistroKid. So DistroKid is a service that lets you upload your music to Spotify, iTunes and other relevant stores, and one reason to use them is the price. They're actually very affordable. Another reason is that once you're a subscriber, you can upload unlimited amounts of music to all the different stores. And they have also launched a super accessible, really easy to use instant mastering service. This new mastering service is called Mixea and it has a super simple to use interface. Anybody can use it. You just drop your music into it and you get one free master download if you just want to test it out, and then you have to subscribe for $99 a year for unlimited amounts of mastered tracks. And it's really easy. Just drop the track in there, you make some adjustments to it, you can change the intensity, the volume of the track, and you can change the EQ from sort of brighter to warmer sounding. And I was actually pleasantly surprised about the results. It sounds pretty good actually. You can go check out DistroKid, they are linked in the description, and if you use my link you get a discount and you also support the channel. Another new thing on the Digitakt 2 is this trig mode here. So I showed you tracks, it's basically selecting tracks and playing them back, velocity, retrigs, ratcheting, and then we have preset pool. So preset pool makes it so that we have one preset per pad here. There's also multiple pages. Hold function and turn this knob and you get the presets here. From here you can press left and you see add to preset pool. So one thing you can do with this is so you can record in various presets and you can also then program them and have just one track. So one track number 1. And this is just one track playing. I have a feeling that you could use the preset pool in a more creative way. Maybe you could put, for example, different sample slices here, play them back in some fun way, but I haven't explored that much. Under this menu here, there's also something called Kit. So we can save the current setup for all the 16 tracks as a kit. So you can see here, there are already kits over here that we can load. So if we go to an empty pattern here, for example, and I go to kit, we can just load this one here, for example. And now we should have, we go to track mode. Yeah, a bunch of different sounds. We can put down a few steps, like so. We can copy pattern, go to pattern number 5, paste it again, load a new kit. And now we have 3 identical patterns with different kits. And now the nifty thing is, if I press function and perform here, it says perform kits is on. So now when I start from this pattern and go here and here, it should keep this kit that I have on this pattern for all of the patterns. And if I turn it off, it reverts back to that previous kit that I had loaded for this particular pattern. And I can see that you could have a lot of fun with this, especially in a live situation. 2 other important things. There is a new sequencer here, a Euclidean sequencer. I won't go into depth because I'm not really good with Euclidean sequencers, but basically it's a different way of generating a pattern. It's a different kind of pattern sequencer. The thing I want to mention is that if you go to a track and you press machine over here and you go down and select MIDI, we now have MIDI tracks that you can assign to any of the tracks here. So you can have 16 sample tracks, or you can have a combination of samples or MIDI tracks. One difference is that if I go here and I long press this value here, send control 1, you see it says MIDI learn. It can now learn from an incoming MIDI signal from a synthesizer, for example, learning what CC value a certain knob has, for example. And I think that is just brilliant. It will make the workflow a lot quicker for using this with external gear. Now, something that you might have noticed or know already is that none of the machines here has the ability to set manual slice points. So if you have a loop sampled, you can time stretch it. You can also use the grid machine that was also on the Digitakt 1 in order to play back different segments of that sample. But there is no way to manually set these slice points. But who knows, maybe we'll get that in the future. I think it would be a nice addition to just have a more advanced grid machine that could let you set your own custom slice points. But there are of course a few workarounds. You could, for example, take a sample and manually set the start and end point, just locking them per step like I've showed you here. So start and end could be locked. And now if we load a time stretch machine and we lock the start and end on these 2 trigs here, we can see that we are jumping between different slices. And if we change the tempo, it follows along. And if we change the tuning, the slices follow along as well. So this is a workaround, but it does take a little bit of patience because, for example, you can't, that I know of, zoom into the waveform. So sometimes there's audible clicks. I've also found that it's much easier if you actually set a step length to say 15, so over here, and then change the amp here so that we don't have like a full long release to avoid like clicking when the sample loops. So you can do a slightly tedious manual parameter locked sample slicing that is also possible to time stretch pretty well, but it is a little tedious, I will be honest. So now, after having tested the Digitakt 2 a bit, I'm going to answer 2 big questions. Firstly, should you upgrade from the Digitakt 1 to Digitakt 2? And secondly, does the Digitakt 2 live up to the hype? Now, if you already have a Digitakt 1, I don't see many big reasons to upgrade because the Digitakt 1 is still a really fun and good device. However, if you are like me and you really want stereo sampling, and I really do, because synth sounds in general is what I sample into it, and synth sounds do take advantage of that stereo field. So if you're like me, that stereo sampling is very important. It just makes things sound more alive Mono is okay, and sure, you could use 2 tracks on the Digitakt and just pan them, but you only had the 8 tracks. You can of course record stuff into a computer and then sort of fake stereo things, but yeah, who does that? I mean, it's very time consuming and doesn't sound as good. So for me, stereo sampling is a really big thing, and if it is for you, then it can actually be worth upgrading just for that alone. Another reason to consider upgrading is if you're hitting some sort of RAM or storage limits. So Digitakt 2 has much more RAM, and it goes from 1 gigabyte of onboard storage to 20 gigabytes. So if you need more storage, if you're hitting those RAM limits, which I probably never did really, then it could be a good reason to upgrade. But like I said, I never hit those limits really, so yeah, it wasn't a huge selling point for me. And the last big selling point to me is that there's actual time stretching on it now. Sure, I would have loved some polyphonic sample playback. I don't think we'll get it. Maybe we'll do. I'd love some manual slicing. I don't think we'll get it, but maybe. But just having time stretching on the Digitakt 2 is amazing. It's something that I use a lot. It's something that I find a lot of creative use for, and I hope I showed you that in today's video. Just the ability to do Control All, tune everything down or change the tempo or something, and have the loops kind of follow along and they don't break apart as easily as they did without the time stretching. That is a big deal to me anyway. So right about now, I sound like the biggest Electron fan, and that this device definitely lives up to the hype. But in truth, I think that it lives up to the hype if you are a diehard Digitakt lover. Because if you love the Digitakt workflow, if it's a device that you truly enjoy working with, then the Digitakt 2 is a no-brainer. But if you can see yourself working with an MPC, a Machina, an SP, for example, instead, definitely look at other devices as well. Sonicware just came out with the Lo-Fi XT, which has polyphonic sample playback and manual slicing. That's a good option as well to look at. So if you are a Digitakt lover like I am, I've been using the Digitakt 1 a ton, then this is living up to the hype. But I think for the more general audience, I don't think there's enough here to call it like groundbreaking, but it is a significant update from the Digitakt 1 if you are into the Electron workflow and the Digitakt workflow in particular. So yeah, I hope that makes sense. And as always, have a great day. Talk to you all later.